The world of Jujutsu Kaisen, the curse of the zero-energy sorcerer, is one where curses and sorcery are intertwined with the fabric of reality. In this universe, cursed energy flows through every living being, a byproduct of negative emotions that can manifest as malevolent spirits known as curses. Sorcerers, individuals who can harness and manipulate this energy, stand as humanity's last line of defense against these monstrous entities. The story begins in Tokyo Jujutsu High, a prestigious institution where young sorcerers are trained to hone their abilities and combat the ever-growing threat of curses. The school is a fortress of tradition and power, its halls echoing with the whispers of ancient techniques and the hum of cursed energy. It is here that our protagonist, Yuto Arashi, a first-year student with a mysterious past, begins his journey. Yuto is an enigma among his peers. Unlike most sorcerers, who exude cursed energy naturally, Yuto possesses a unique trait: his cursed energy is completely nullified, rendering him invisible to curses and undetectable by other sorcerers. This anomaly, dubbed the zero-energy phenomenon, has made him both an outcast and a curiosity. While his classmates train to amplify their energy, Yuto has had to rely on his physical prowess, sharp instincts, and an unorthodox fighting style that blends martial arts with improvised weaponry. His motivation is deeply personal. He seeks to uncover the truth behind his parents' disappearance, which he believes is tied to a powerful curse that even the most seasoned sorcerers fear to confront. Yuto's quiet determination and unwavering resolve set him apart, but his lack of cursed energy has left him underestimated by many, including his own classmates. Among those classmates is Aoi Takeda, a prodigious sorcerer whose cursed energy is as volatile as her temper. Aoi wields a technique called Infernal Rage, which allows her to channel her emotions into devastating bursts of flame. Her fiery personality and fierce loyalty make her a formidable ally, but her impulsiveness often puts her at odds with Yuto's calculated approach. Despite their differences, the two share a mutual respect forged through countless sparring sessions and missions. Aoi's motivation is rooted in her desire to prove herself, not just to her peers but to her family, who have long doubted her ability to control her powers. Her journey is one of self-discovery, as she learns to balance her raw strength with the discipline required to master her craft. The third member of their trio is Renji Kuroda, a calm and analytical sorcerer whose technique, Shadow Weave, allows him to manipulate darkness as both a weapon and a shield. Renji is the voice of reason in the group, often mediating between Yuto and Aoi when their clashing personalities threaten to derail their missions. His motivations are shrouded in mystery, but his unwavering dedication to his friends suggests a deeper connection to the world of curses than he lets on. Renji's quiet strength and strategic mind make him an invaluable asset, but his tendency to withhold information has left Yuto and Aoi questioning his true intentions. The story's initial conflict arises during a routine mission to exorcise a low-level curse haunting a local shrine. The trio is dispatched to investigate, but what begins as a simple task quickly escalates into a life-or-death struggle. The curse, far more powerful than anticipated, reveals itself to be a harbinger of a larger threat. As the battle unfolds, the characters' strengths and weaknesses are laid bare. Yuto's lack of cursed energy proves to be both a blessing and a curse. While he remains undetected by the enemy, his inability to channel energy limits his offensive capabilities. He relies on his agility and precision, using a pair of curse daggers to strike at the curse's weak points. His movements are fluid and deliberate, each strike calculated to maximize impact. The curse counters with a barrage of energy blasts, forcing Yuto to rely on his reflexes to evade the attacks. Despite the odds, he manages to land a critical blow, momentarily staggering the curse. Aoi, meanwhile, unleashes her infernal rage with reckless abandon. Her flames engulf the battlefield, illuminating the shrine with an otherworldly glow. The curse recoils as her attacks sear its form, but Aoi's lack of control leaves her vulnerable. The curse retaliates with a powerful shockwave, sending her crashing into a nearby wall. Undeterred, she rises to her feet, her eyes blazing with determination. "I'm not done yet," she shouts, her voice echoing through the night. With a burst of energy, she channels her flames into a concentrated beam, piercing the curse's defenses and dealing a devastating blow. Her strength is undeniable, but the toll it takes on her body is evident as she collapses to her knees, exhausted but victorious. Renji's role in the battle is one of support and strategy. Using his Shadow Weave technique, he creates barriers to shield his teammates and ensnares the curse in tendrils of darkness. His attacks are precise and methodical, each movement calculated to exploit the curse's weaknesses. When the curse attempts to escape, Renji is quick to react, using his shadows to bind it in place. "Now, Yuto," he commands, his voice calm but urgent. Yuto seizes the opportunity, delivering the final blow with a swift strike to the curse's core. As the curse dissipates, the trio stands victorious, but the victory is bittersweet. The curse's final words linger in the air, a chilling warning of a greater threat on the horizon. You've only delayed the inevitable, it whispers, its voice fading into the night. The zero-energy sorcerer will fall, and the world will burn. The battle serves as a turning point for the characters, forcing them to confront their limitations and the growing danger they face. Yuto's unique trait, once seen as a weakness, begins to reveal its potential as a weapon against curses. Aoi's raw power is tempered by the realization that strength alone is not enough to overcome the challenges ahead. And Renji's secrets, though still hidden, hint at a deeper connection to the world of curses that may hold the key to their survival. As the trio returns to Tokyo Jujutsu High, the weight of their mission settles upon them. The curse's warning lingers in their minds, a harbinger of the trials to come. The stage is set for a larger conflict, one that will test their bonds, their abilities, and their resolve. The curse of the zero-energy sorcerer has only just begun, and the path ahead is fraught with danger and uncertainty. The air was thick with tension as the aftermath of the first battle against the zero-energy sorcerer lingered like a storm cloud over the Jujutsu High team. Yuji Itadori, Megumi Fushiguro, and Nobara Kujisaki stood amidst the ruins of the cursed forest, their breaths ragged and their bodies battered. The zero-energy sorcerer, a mysterious figure whose cursed energy seemed to nullify all others, had retreated, leaving behind a trail of destruction and unanswered questions. But the respite was short-lived. A new threat loomed, one that would test their resolve and unity like never before. As the team regrouped, Gojo Satoru arrived, his usual carefree demeanor replaced by uncharacteristic seriousness. "We have a problem," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "The zero-energy sorcerer isn't acting alone. There's a secondary force at play, a cursed spirit known as the Veil Weaver. It's been manipulating events from the shadows, amplifying the zero-energy sorcerer's abilities and spreading chaos across the region." The revelation sent a chill through the group. The Veil Weaver was no ordinary cursed spirit, it was said to be capable of distorting reality itself, creating illusions so potent they could drive even the strongest sorcerers to madness. Yuji clenched his fists, his determination burning brighter than ever. "We can't let this thing keep messing with us. We have to take it down before it makes things worse." Megumi nodded, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. "But we need a plan. If the Veil Weaver can manipulate reality, we can't rely on brute force alone. We'll need to outthink it." Nobara, ever the pragmatist, added, "And we'll need to watch each other's backs. If it can mess with our heads, we can't afford to turn on each other." The team set out toward the heart of the cursed forest, where the Veil Weaver was rumored to reside. As they ventured deeper, the environment grew increasingly surreal. Trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air shimmered with an eerie glow, and whispers echoed from unseen sources, each one a fragment of the Veil Weaver's illusions. Yuji felt a pang of unease but shook it off, focusing on the task at hand. "Stay sharp," Megumi warned. "We don't know what it's going to throw at us." Their first encounter with the Veil Weaver's influence came in the form of a doppelganger. Emerging from the shadows was an exact replica of Yuji, its eyes hollow and its smile unnervingly wide. "What's the matter, Yuji?" it taunted, its voice dripping with malice. "Afraid to face yourself?" Yuji froze, his mind racing. The doppelganger lunged, its movements mirroring his own. The two clashed in a flurry of punches and kicks, each strike reverberating through the forest. Yuji gritted his teeth, struggling to gain the upper hand. "This thing. It's like fighting my own shadow." Megumi and Nobara moved to assist, but the Veil Weaver's illusions intervened. A wall of thorns erupted from the ground, separating them from Yuji. "Focus on breaking through," Megumi shouted, summoning his divine dogs to tear through the barrier. Nobara, meanwhile, hurled her nails infused with cursed energy, aiming to disrupt the illusion's stability. The doppelganger faltered for a moment, giving Yuji the opening he needed. With a powerful uppercut, he shattered the illusion, the doppelganger dissolving into a cloud of cursed energy. But the victory was short-lived. The Veil Weaver's voice echoed through the forest, a haunting melody that sent shivers down their spines. "You think you can defeat me? How amusing. You are nothing but pawns in my game." The ground beneath them began to shift, the forest transforming into a labyrinth of mirrors. Each reflection showed a distorted version of the team, their fears and insecurities laid bare. Yuji saw himself consumed by Sukuna's power, Megumi faced the loss of his sister, and Nobara confronted her deepest doubts about her worth as a sorcerer. The psychological assault was relentless, but the team refused to succumb. "Don't let it get to you," Yuji shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We're stronger than this." Megumi closed his eyes, focusing on his connection to his Shikigami. "Divine Dog, Totality." He called, summoning a massive wolf-like creature that tore through the mirrors, shattering the illusions. Nobra, meanwhile, used her resonance technique to target the Veil Weaver's energy directly, her nails striking with pinpoint accuracy. As the illusions crumbled, the Veil Weaver's true form was revealed, a grotesque, spider-like creature with a humanoid face, its body cloaked in a shimmering veil. "You dare defy me?" it hissed, its voice a cacophony of whispers. "I will break you, piece by piece." The battle that followed was a test of both skill and endurance. The Veil Weaver's attacks were unpredictable, its illusions blending seamlessly with reality. Yuji and Megumi fought in tandem, their movements synchronized as they exploited the creature's weaknesses. Yuji's raw strength and speed kept the Veil Weaver on the defensive, while Megumi's strategic use of his Shikigami created openings for decisive strikes. Nobra, meanwhile, focused on disrupting the Veil Weaver's cursed energy. "Resonance, chain reaction," she shouted, embedding a nail into the creature's veil. The resulting explosion of cursed energy sent the Veil Weaver reeling, its form flickering like a dying flame. "Now," Yuji yelled, charging forward with all his might. His fist connected with the Veil Weaver's core, the impact reverberating through the forest. The creature let out a final, ear-piercing screech before disintegrating into nothingness. The team stood amidst the ruins of the battle, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. "We did it," Yuji said, a hint of relief in his voice. But Megumi's expression remained grim. "This isn't over. The Veil Weaver was just a pawn. The zero-energy sorcerer is still out there, and now they know we're coming." Nobra crossed her arms, her usual confidence tempered by the weight of their mission. "Then we'll be ready. Whatever it takes, we'll stop them." As they prepared to move out, a faint whisper reached their ears, a voice they hadn't heard before. "You think you've won? How naive. The true game has only just begun." The source of the voice remained hidden, but its message was clear. The stakes had been raised, and the path ahead was fraught with danger. The team exchanged determined glances, their resolve hardening. They had faced illusions and betrayal, but they were stronger together. And they would face whatever came next, no matter the cost. The air in the Shibuya district was thick with cursed energy, a palpable tension that clung to the streets like a suffocating fog. Yuji Itadori, Megumi Fushiguro, and Nobara Kujisaki moved cautiously through the chaos, their senses heightened by the recent surge in cursed spirits. The zero-energy sorcerer's curse had begun to spread, its effects growing more unpredictable by the hour. The trio had just managed to regroup after a harrowing encounter with a cursed spirit that had nearly overwhelmed them. Their plan was clear: locate the source of the curse and neutralize it before it consumed the city. But plans, as they often do, began to unravel the moment a new player entered the fray. From the shadows of a crumbling building emerged a figure cloaked in a tattered black robe, their face obscured by a mask resembling a cracked porcelain doll. The mask's hollow eyes seemed to glow faintly, and the figure moved with an eerie grace, their steps silent against the cracked pavement. Yuji's fists clenched instinctively, his cursed energy flaring as he prepared for a fight. Megumi's hands twitched toward his shadow technique, while Nobara gripped her hammer and nails tightly, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Who are you?" Yuji demanded, his voice steady but edged with tension. The figure tilted their head, the mask's cracked surface catching the dim light. When they spoke, their voice was a haunting blend of monotone and malice, each word dripping with an unsettling calm. "Names are irrelevant. What matters is that you're in my way." Before anyone could react, the figure lunged, their movements a blur of speed and precision. Yuji barely managed to block the first strike, a curved blade of cursed energy slicing through the air where his head had been moments before. The force of the blow sent him skidding backward, his arms trembling from the impact. Megumi reacted instantly, summoning his divine dogs to flank the attacker. The twin wolves lunged, their jaws snapping at the figure's legs, but the masked sorcerer moved with unnatural agility, dodging the attacks with a fluidity that defied logic. With a flick of their wrist, they summoned a wave of cursed energy that sent the divine dogs sprawling, their forms dissipating into shadows. Nobara seized the opening, hurling a nail infused with her cursed energy at the figure's mask. The projectile struck true, but instead of shattering, the mask absorbed the energy, its cracks glowing brighter. The figure chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent a chill down Nobara's spine. "Is that all you've got?" they taunted, their voice echoing unnaturally. Yuji surged forward, his fists crackling with cursed energy. He aimed a series of rapid punches, each one designed to overwhelm the figure's defenses. But the masked sorcerer countered with a flurry of strikes, their blade of cursed energy meeting Yuji's fists in a dazzling exchange of sparks and force. The ground beneath them cracked under the pressure, the air vibrating with the intensity of their clash. Yuji gritted his teeth, his muscles straining as he pushed himself to keep up with the figure's relentless assault. For every punch he landed, the figure seemed to anticipate his moves, their blade slicing dangerously close to his skin. Megumi, realizing brute force alone wouldn't be enough, summoned his new, the massive bird-like Shikigami swooping down from above to strike the figure with a burst of electricity. The masked sorcerer raised their free hand, summoning a barrier of cursed energy that absorbed the attack. With a swift motion, they redirected the energy back at Megumi, forcing him to dive out of the way. The blast tore through the ground where he had been standing, leaving a smoldering crater in its wake. Nobara, undeterred, launched another nail, this time aiming for the figure's legs. The projectile struck, but the figure barely flinched, their movements unhindered. "You're persistent," they remarked, their tone almost amused. But persistence without power is meaningless. The trio regrouped, their breathing heavy as they assessed the situation. This new enemy was unlike anything they had faced before, their cursed energy seemingly limitless and their combat skills unparalleled. "We need to work together," Megumi said, his voice low but urgent. "If we keep attacking individually, they'll pick us apart." Yuji nodded, his eyes locked on the figure. "Got it. Let's hit them with everything we've got." Nobara smirked, despite the tension. "About time we showed them what we're made of." As one, they launched their coordinated assault. Yuji charged forward, his fists blazing with cursed energy, while Megumi summoned his toad Shikigami to ensnare the figure's movements. Nobara positioned herself at a distance, hurling nails infused with her cursed energy to disrupt the figure's defenses. For a moment, it seemed their plan was working. The figure struggled against the combined onslaught, their movements slowing as they were forced to divide their attention. But just as victory seemed within reach, the figure's cursed energy surged, a dark aura enveloping them like a storm. With a single, devastating motion, they shattered the toad's grip and sent Yuji flying with a powerful kick. Megumi barely managed to dodge a follow-up strike, his shadow technique faltering under the sheer force of the attack. Nobara's nails were deflected effortlessly, the figure's barrier of cursed energy now impenetrable. The masked sorcerer stood amidst the chaos, their presence radiating an overwhelming sense of power. "You're strong," they admitted, their voice carrying a hint of respect. "But strength alone won't save you. Not from what's coming." Before the trio could recover, the figure vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only the faint echo of their laughter. The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of their defeat settling heavily on the group. As they regrouped, Yuji clenched his fists, his frustration evident. "Who the hell was that?" he muttered, his voice tinged with anger. Megumi frowned, his mind racing. "They're not just another cursed spirit. That level of control over cursed energy. They're a sorcerer. But whose side are they on?" Nobara crossed her arms, her expression grim. "Does it matter? They're in our way, and they're dangerous. We need to figure out how to take them down before they come after us again." The encounter had left them shaken, their confidence in their abilities tested. The masked sorcerer's arrival had shifted the dynamics of their mission, introducing a wild card that complicated their plans and raised unsettling questions. Who was this mysterious figure, and what were their motives? How were they connected to the zero-energy sorcerer's curse? And most importantly, how could they hope to defeat an enemy who seemed to outmatch them at every turn? As the trio prepared to continue their mission, the shadow of the masked sorcerer loomed large in their minds, a reminder that the path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty. The fight had only just begun, and the stakes had never been higher. The air was thick with tension as the Jujutsu sorcerers regrouped in the dimly lit ruins of the abandoned temple, their breaths heavy and their bodies battered from the relentless onslaught of cursed spirits. The zero-energy sorcerer, their enigmatic and seemingly invincible foe, had pushed them to their limits. Yuji Itadori clenched his fists, his knuckles white, as he stared at the flickering cursed energy in the distance. "We can't keep fighting like this," he muttered, his voice strained. "We need a plan, something we haven't tried before." Megumi Fushiguro nodded, his usual calm demeanor frayed at the edges. "The zero-energy sorcerer isn't just strong, he's adapting to our techniques. Every time we think we've got him, he counters us like he knows what we're going to do before we do it." Nobara Kujisaki, leaning against a crumbling pillar, wiped blood from her brow. "It's like he's reading our minds or something. But that's impossible, right?" Gojo Satoru, who had been silent, his blindfold obscuring his expression, finally spoke. "Not impossible. Just highly unlikely. Unless..." He trailed off, his tone ominous. The group turned to him, their unease growing. "Unless what?" Yuji demanded. Gojo's lips curled into a grim smile. "Unless he's not just a sorcerer. Unless he's something more." The revelation hit them like a thunderbolt. The zero-energy sorcerer wasn't just a cursed user, He was a fusion of human and cursed spirit, a being capable of absorbing and nullifying cursed energy entirely. His zero energy wasn't just a technique, it was his very essence. This explained why their attacks seemed to dissipate before they could land, why their strategies fell apart the moment they engaged him. So, what do we do? Nobra asked, her voice trembling. If we can't use cursed energy against him, we're basically fighting with one hand tied behind our backs. Gojo's expression darkened. We adapt. We fight without relying on cursed energy. Or we find a way to disrupt his absorption ability. Yuji's eyes widened. Wait, you're saying we have to fight him? Like normal people? No cursed techniques, no domain expansions? Gojo nodded. Exactly. It's the only way. The weight of his words settled over them like a suffocating blanket. They were sorcerers, cursed energy was their lifeblood. To fight without it was unthinkable. But they had no choice. The battle resumed with a desperate urgency. The zero-energy sorcerer stood at the center of the ruined temple, his presence radiating an oppressive stillness. Yuji charged first, his fists clenched, relying purely on his physical strength. The sorcerer dodged with ease, his movements fluid and precise. Yuji's punches, once devastating, now seemed sluggish and predictable. The sorcerer countered with a swift strike to Yuji's ribs, sending him sprawling. Megumi summoned his divine dogs, but the sorcerer nullified their cursed energy with a wave of his hand, rendering them useless. Nobra hurled her hammer, aiming for a direct hit, but the sorcerer caught it midair and crushed it effortlessly. Is this all you've got? The sorcerer taunted, his voice cold and mocking. I expected more from the so-called strongest. Gojo, watching from the sidelines, clenched his teeth. He couldn't intervene directly, his cursed energy was too potent, too easily absorbed. But he had to do something. Yuji, he shouted. Remember your training. You don't need cursed energy to be strong. Yuji, struggling to his feet, wiped blood from his mouth. Right, he muttered. No cursed energy. Just me. He focused, channeling his raw determination. This time, when he attacked, his movements were sharper, more calculated. He feinted left, then struck right, landing a solid blow to the sorcerer's jaw. The sorcerer staggered, his expression flickering with surprise. Interesting, he said, regaining his composure. But not enough. The fight escalated, each moment more desperate than the last. Megumi, realizing his Shikigami were useless, resorted to hand-to-hand combat, his movements precise but lacking the power to make a significant impact. Nobra, weaponless, used the environment to her advantage, hurling debris and creating distractions. But the sorcerer was relentless, his attacks growing more brutal with each passing second. Yuji, battered and bruised, refused to give up. He remembered Gojo's words, this wasn't just about strength, it was about strategy. He needed to disrupt the sorcerer's absorption ability, but how? Then it hit him. Nobra. Megumi. Cover me, he shouted, darting toward the sorcerer. Nobra and Megumi, understanding his intent, launched a coordinated assault, forcing the sorcerer to divide his attention. Yuji, seizing the opportunity, grabbed a shard of broken glass from the ground and slashed at the sorcerer's arm. The sorcerer hissed in pain, his absorption faltering for a split second. It was enough. Yuji channeled every ounce of his strength into a single punch, aiming for the sorcerer's chest. The impact was deafening, the force of the blow sending shockwaves through the air. The sorcerer stumbled back, his expression twisted in agony. You actually hurt me, he said, his voice trembling with rage. But it's too late. Before Yuji could react, the sorcerer unleashed a devastating wave of energy, not cursed but pure kinetic force. The blast sent Yuji flying, his body slamming into a wall with bone-crushing force. Nobra and Megumi were thrown to the ground, their bodies racked with pain. Gojo, unable to stand by any longer, stepped forward. Enough, he said, his voice low and dangerous. He removed his blindfold, revealing his piercing blue eyes. You've pushed them far enough. Now it's my turn. The sorcerer laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. You think you can defeat me, Gojo Satoru? Even you rely on cursed energy. Without it, you're nothing. Gojo's expression didn't change. You're right, he said. But I don't need cursed energy to beat you. I just need to outthink you. With that, he charged, his movements a blur. The sorcerer, caught off guard by Gojo's sheer speed, struggled to keep up. Gojo's attacks were precise, calculated, each one designed to exploit the sorcerer's weaknesses. The sorcerer, for the first time, began to falter. But just as Gojo seemed to gain the upper hand, the sorcerer unleashed a final, desperate attack, a massive explosion of energy that engulfed the entire temple. When the dust settled, Gojo stood alone, his body battered but unbroken. The sorcerer was gone, but the cost had been high. Yuji, Nobara, and Megumi lay unconscious, their bodies broken but alive. Gojo knelt beside them, his expression unreadable. "You did well," he said softly. "But this isn't over. Not yet." The aftermath of the battle left the group reeling. The zero-energy sorcerer's true nature had been revealed, but at a great cost. Their strategies had failed, their strength had been tested, and their resolve had been shaken. But they had survived. And in survival, there was hope. As they tended to their wounds and prepared for the next battle, they knew one thing for certain: the fight against the zero-energy sorcerer was far from over. And the next time they faced him, they would be ready. The air crackled with tension as the remnants of the Jujutsu sorcerers gathered in the dimly lit underground bunker, their faces etched with exhaustion and determination. The revelation of the zero-energy sorcerer's true nature had sent shockwaves through their ranks. This entity, once thought to be a dormant force, had awakened with a vengeance, its cursed energy nullifying all techniques and rendering even the strongest sorcerers powerless. The stakes had never been higher, and time was running out. The zero-energy sorcerer was amassing an army of cursed spirits, its influence spreading like a plague across the land. The clock was ticking, and the sorcerers knew they had to act fast. Yuji Itadori clenched his fists, his knuckles white. "We can't just sit here and wait for it to come to us. We need to hit it where it hurts, and we need to do it now." Megumi Fushiguro nodded, his usual stoic demeanor tinged with urgency. "Agreed. But we're not ready. If we go in blind, we're just throwing our lives away." Nobara Kujisaki leaned against the wall, her hammer resting on her shoulder. "So, what's the plan? Train until we drop? Hope we stumble on some miracle weakness?" Gojo Satoru, his blindfold slightly askew, stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "We do both. We train harder than ever, and we find a way to exploit its weakness. The zero-energy sorcerer may negate cursed energy, but it's not invincible. Nothing is." The training began immediately, each sorcerer pushing themselves to their limits. Yuji sparred with Maki Zenin, her cursed tools providing a unique challenge. Without cursed energy, Yuji had to rely on pure physical combat, his movements becoming sharper, more precise. Maki's relentless attacks forced him to adapt, and soon he was dodging and countering with a fluidity he hadn't thought possible. "You're getting better," Maki admitted, her tone grudgingly approving. "But you're still too predictable. Think outside the box." Yuji grinned, sweat dripping down his face. "Got it. Let's go again." Meanwhile, Megumi and Nobara worked on combining their techniques. Megumi's Shikigami and Nobara's resonance had always been powerful, but against the zero-energy sorcerer, they needed something more. They experimented with environmental hazards, using the terrain to their advantage. In a mock battle, Megumi summoned his divine dog, while Nobara embedded nails into the ground, creating a trap. When the dog lunged, Nobara activated her technique, causing the nails to explode and redirect the attack. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. "We need to think bigger," Megumi said, his eyes narrowing. "If we can't use cursed energy directly, we'll use it indirectly. The environment, the tools, even the enemy's own strength against them." Gojo observed their progress, his mind racing. He knew they needed more than just physical training. They needed allies. He reached out to Kyoto Jujutsu High, hoping to form an alliance. The response was hesitant but hopeful. The Kyoto students, led by Aoi Toto and Mai Zenin, arrived within days, their own resolve hardened by the looming threat. "We're in this together," Toto declared, clapping Yuji on the back with enough force to nearly knock him over. "Let's show this zero-energy freak what we're made of." As the group trained, they also sought out information. Panda and Inumaki scoured ancient texts, searching for any mention of the zero-energy sorcerer. They discovered a cryptic passage about a void that consumes all, yet leaves a trace. It was vague, but it was a lead. "A trace," Inumaki repeated, his voice muffled by his high collar. "Salmon." Panda nodded. "If we can find that trace, maybe we can use it to our advantage." The breakthrough came during a late-night session. Yuta Akotsu, who had been training in isolation, returned with a startling revelation. "The zero-energy sorcerer doesn't just negate cursed energy," he explained, his voice steady. "It absorbs it. But every time it does, there's a brief moment where its own energy fluctuates. If we can time our attacks just right, we might be able to disrupt its absorption and create an opening." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. "That's it," Gojo said, a rare smile crossing his face. "That's our weakness." The final battle plan was set. They would lure the zero-energy sorcerer into a heavily cursed area, where the residual energy would mask their presence. Using Yuta's discovery, they would coordinate their attacks to exploit the brief fluctuation in its energy. It was risky, but it was their only shot. The day of the battle arrived, the sky dark and foreboding. The sorcerers moved into position, their hearts pounding. The zero-energy sorcerer emerged, its form a swirling void of darkness. It moved with an eerie grace, its presence suffocating. Yuji charged first, his fists glowing with cursed energy. The zero-energy sorcerer absorbed the attack effortlessly, but Yuji didn't falter. He feinted, drawing its attention, while Megumi and Nobara set their traps. Maki and Toto flanked it, their cursed tools striking with precision. The zero-energy sorcerer retaliated, its attacks devastating, but the sorcerers held their ground. Then, the moment came. Yuta activated his technique, his cursed energy surging. The zero-energy sorcerer absorbed it, and for a split second, its energy fluctuated. Now, Gojo shouted, unleashing his hollow purple. The attack struck true, disrupting the zero-energy sorcerer's absorption. It staggered, its form flickering. The sorcerers pressed their advantage, their attacks relentless. Yuji delivered a final blow, his fist connecting with a satisfying crunch. The zero-energy sorcerer let out a deafening roar before collapsing, its form dissipating into nothingness. The battlefield fell silent, the sorcerers breathing heavily. They had done it. But as they looked around, they knew this was only the beginning. The zero-energy sorcerer was gone, but the scars it left behind would take time to heal. And in the shadows, new threats loomed, waiting for their moment to strike. The fight was far from over, but for now, they had won. And that was enough. The battlefield was a chaotic storm of cursed energy, the air crackling with tension as the final clash between the sorcerers and the zero-energy curse reached its peak. The zero-energy sorcerer, a being of unfathomable power, loomed at the center of the maelstrom, its form shifting between humanoid and monstrous as it absorbed the cursed energy of the fallen. Its presence was suffocating, a void that threatened to consume everything in its path. But the sorcerers, battered and bloodied, refused to yield. This was their moment to push past their limits, to fight for the future of their world. Yuji Itadori charged forward, his fists glowing with cursed energy as he unleashed a barrage of punches. Each strike was a blur of motion, his movements precise and devastating. The zero-energy sorcerer countered with a wave of dark energy, but Yuji twisted midair, narrowly avoiding the attack. He landed in a crouch, his eyes blazing with determination. "You're not taking anyone else," he roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. With a burst of speed, he closed the distance again, his fists slamming into the curse's defenses. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the battlefield, but the curse barely flinched. It retaliated with a swipe of its clawed hand, forcing Yuji to leap back. His chest heaved as he steadied himself, his mind racing for a new strategy. "I can't keep this up forever," he muttered, glancing at his allies. "We need to hit it harder, together." Megumi Fushiguro stood a few meters away, his hands weaving intricate signs as he summoned his Shikigami. "Divine Dog, Totality," he called, his voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into his face. The massive wolf-like Shikigami materialized in a flash of light, its fangs bared as it lunged at the curse. The zero-energy sorcerer swatted it aside with ease, but Megumi was already moving, his shadow extending across the ground. "Domain expansion, Chimera Shadow Garden," he declared, his voice resonating with power. The battlefield transformed into a dark, twisted forest, the shadows alive with movement. The curse hesitated, its form flickering as it tried to adapt to the sudden shift in terrain. Megumi seized the opportunity, his Shikigami emerging from the shadows to strike from all angles. "Now, Yuji," he shouted, his voice strained but determined. Yuji didn't need to be told twice. He surged forward, his cursed energy flaring as he channeled every ounce of his strength into a single, devastating punch. The zero-energy sorcerer raised its arm to block, but the force of Yuji's attack shattered its defenses, sending it staggering back. "Not bad," the curse hissed, its voice a guttural growl. "But you'll need more than that to defeat me." It retaliated with a blast of dark energy, the sheer force of it sending Yuji skidding across the ground. He gritted his teeth, his body screaming in protest, but he forced himself to his feet. "I'm not done yet," he growled, his eyes narrowing. "Not even close." Nobara Kujisaki, meanwhile, was locked in her own battle, her hammer and nails glowing with cursed energy as she fought to keep the curse's minions at bay. "Resonance," she shouted, driving a nail into a cursed spirit's head. The energy surged through the spirit, obliterating it in an instant, but more were already closing in. "This is getting ridiculous," she muttered, her breath coming in short gasps. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she saw Yuji and Megumi struggling against the zero-energy sorcerer. "We need to end this, now." With a determined cry, she charged forward, her hammer raised high. "Black flash," she yelled, her attack connecting with the curse's side. The impact sent a shockwave through the battlefield, but the curse barely flinched. It turned to face her, its eyes glowing with malice. "You're persistent," it sneered, raising its hand to strike. Before it could attack, a blur of motion intercepted it. Maki Zenin, her body battered but unbroken, slammed into the curse with the force of a freight train. Her curse tool, a massive blade forged from pure energy, sliced through the air as she unleashed a flurry of attacks. "You're not the only one who can adapt," she growled, her movements a blur of precision and power. The zero-energy sorcerer staggered under the assault, its form flickering as it struggled to keep up. Maki pressed the advantage, her blade carving through its defenses with ruthless efficiency. "This ends now," she declared, her voice cold and unwavering. But the curse wasn't done yet. With a roar, it unleashed a wave of dark energy, the force of it sending Maki flying. She landed hard, her body skidding across the ground, but she was back on her feet in an instant. "Is that all you've got?" she taunted, her voice dripping with defiance. The curse snarled, its form shifting as it prepared to unleash its full power. The air grew heavy, the ground trembling beneath their feet as the curse's energy surged. "You fools," it hissed, its voice echoing with malice. "You cannot defeat me. I am the embodiment of despair, the end of all things." Yuji stepped forward, his fists clenched as he faced the curse head-on. "Maybe not," he admitted, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at the edges of his mind. "But we're not going down without a fight." He glanced at his allies, a silent understanding passing between them. They had come too far to give up now. With a roar, they charged forward, their attacks converging on the curse in a blinding explosion of light and energy. The battlefield was consumed in a maelstrom of power, the sheer force of their combined strength shaking the very foundations of the earth. When the dust settled, the zero-energy sorcerer stood amidst the wreckage, its form flickering as it struggled to maintain its shape. "Impossible," it hissed, its voice barely a whisper. You cannot defeat me." But its words were hollow, its power waning as the sorcerers pressed their advantage. Yuji, his body battered and broken, delivered the final blow, his fist slamming into the curse's core with the force of 1,000 suns. The curse let out a final, agonized scream as its form disintegrated, its energy dissipating into the air. The battlefield fell silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of the sorcerers as they struggled to stay on their feet. We did it," Yuji gasped, his voice trembling with exhaustion. But even as the words left his lips, he knew the fight wasn't over. The zero-energy sorcerer may have been defeated, but the scars of the battle would linger, a reminder of the cost of their victory. And as the dust settled, the sorcerers stood together, their resolve unshaken. They had pushed past their limits, faced their darkest fears, and emerged stronger for it. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. The air crackled with cursed energy as the battlefield trembled under the weight of the final clash. The zero-energy sorcerer, a being of unfathomable power, stood at the center of the chaos, his presence a void that seemed to devour the very essence of life. Yuji Itadori, Megumi Fushiguro, and Nobara Kujisaki, battered and bloodied, stood against him, their resolve unshaken despite the overwhelming odds. This was the moment that would define everything, their limits, their bonds, and the fate of the world. Yuji charged first, his fists glowing with cursed energy as he unleashed a flurry of attacks. Each strike was met with an eerie stillness, the zero-energy sorcerer absorbing the force effortlessly. "Is that all you've got?" the sorcerer taunted, his voice echoing like a hollow wind. Yuji gritted his teeth, his body screaming in protest as he pushed himself harder. He could feel his cursed energy waning, but he refused to back down. "I'm not done yet," he roared, channeling every ounce of strength into a devastating punch. The impact sent shockwaves through the battlefield, but the sorcerer remained unmoved, his expression one of cold indifference. Megumi seized the opportunity, summoning his divine dogs to flank the enemy. The shadowy creatures lunged with feral ferocity, their teeth bared and claws gleaming. The zero-energy sorcerer raised a hand, and the dogs disintegrated into nothingness, their forms swallowed by the void. Megumi's heart sank, but he quickly regrouped, his hands weaving intricate signs. "Domain expansion, Chimera Shadow Garden," he declared, the battlefield transforming into a labyrinth of shadows. The sorcerer's movement slowed as the shadows coiled around him, but he merely smirked. "A clever trick," he said, "but futile." With a wave of his hand, the domain shattered, and Megumi collapsed to his knees, his energy spent. Nobara, her face streaked with blood and dirt, stepped forward, her hammer and nails at the ready. "You're not the only one who can manipulate energy," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. She drove a nail into her own arm, using her body as a conduit to amplify her curse technique. "Resonance," she shouted, the energy surging toward the sorcerer. For a moment, it seemed to work, his form flickered, his expression faltering. But then he laughed, a sound that sent chills down her spine. "Impressive," he said, "but you're still outmatched." He flicked his wrist, and Nobara was sent flying, her body crashing into the rubble. The trio lay broken, their strength nearly depleted. The zero-energy sorcerer loomed over them, his presence suffocating. "You fought well," he said, "but this is the end." He raised his hand, a vortex of energy forming in his palm. Yuji struggled to his feet, his body trembling with exhaustion. "No," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We're not done yet." He reached deep within himself, tapping into a reservoir of power he had never accessed before. His eyes glowed with a fierce light as his cursed energy surged, the ground cracking beneath him. "This is for everyone who believed in me," he said, his voice steady now. "This is for the future." With a roar, Yuji launched himself at the sorcerer, his fists blazing with energy. The impact was unlike anything before, the void around the sorcerer wavered, his defenses cracking under the sheer force of Yuji's will. Megumi and Nobara, inspired by his determination, rose to their feet, their own energy reigniting. "We're not giving up," Megumi shouted, summoning his most powerful Shikigami. Nobara, her nails glowing with cursed energy, joined the assault, her attacks precise and unrelenting. The three of them fought as one, their movements synchronized, their resolve unbreakable. The zero-energy sorcerer faltered, his void beginning to collapse under the relentless assault. "Impossible," he muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You're just humans." Yuji's fist connected with his chest, the energy exploding in a blinding flash. "We're more than that," Yuji said, his voice filled with conviction. "We're the ones who decide our fate." The sorcerer's form began to disintegrate, his void collapsing in on itself. With a final, deafening roar, he was gone, the battlefield falling silent. The aftermath was a mix of relief and sorrow. The trio stood amidst the ruins, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. The world around them began to heal, the cursed energy dissipating as the balance was restored. Yuji looked at his friends, a small smile tugging at his lips. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Megumi nodded, his expression one of weary satisfaction. "Yeah," he said, "but it wasn't easy." Nobara, ever the pragmatist, sighed. "Let's never do that again," she said, though her tone was light. As the dust settled, the impact of their victory became clear. The zero-energy sorcerer's defeat had not only saved the world but also reshaped the dynamics of the Jujutsu world. The balance of power shifted, and new alliances were formed. The trio, now hailed as heroes, found themselves at the center of a new era. But they knew the fight was far from over. The scars of battle would remain, a reminder of the cost of their victory. Yet, as they stood together, they also knew they had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The final battle had tested their limits, but it had also shown them the power of their bonds. And in that moment, they knew they could overcome anything, together.